I was working in the Czech Republic at a kids' summer camp when I was 20. It was nothing like the American summer camps I've seen on TV. It was much more relaxed. We owned a huge cabin in the forest just outside a small town. There were walking tracks around and people would walk past our cabin and field area from time to time. One day, I was doing some small crafts with the group. We were at a table that could be seen from the walking tracks when this guy walks past. He's alone, about 30 and had dreads, heavy boots and these patchwork pants on, and a loose metal singlet. He stops mid-walk when he spots us and starts to approach. He asks me in Czech if I have any cigarettes. I tell him in Czech, I'm sorry, I don't speak Czech very well, in an attempt for him to give up and leave. I'm trying to be nice because I have 5 kids sitting at the table and I don't want them to be scared. He then switches to English and I'm like, fuck. It was a 50-50 chance that he would speak English in a part of the country like this. He then comments on my tattoos. I have a sleeve, asking me all this stuff. Says he's going to get a new one soon. He asks about the cigarettes again. I say no and was polite about the tattoos but not encouraging conversation. He asks my name and I tell him and he keeps talking for a bit. After a while he moves on. I sigh with relief and the day continues. Later that afternoon, it was around 6, still light and we were killing time before dinner was being served. I was in the field outside the cabin and some kids running around. Other leaders were doing various activities with kids, when all of a sudden another leader got my attention and told me to get the kids inside. I looked up on either side of the field where the trees start. There were a lot of guys dressed similar to the guy earlier, standing just back from the tree line. They had spread out and approached from different directions. Then I hear someone shouting my name. We move all of the kids inside and lock the door. The 3 male leaders we have go out to talk to the guys in the forest. My friend says they were just calling my name. I start freaking out. What the fuck? Is it the guy from the morning? I want to show her my new tattoo. Confused. The leaders come back and are like, who is this guy? They know I'm not Czech and I don't know many people outside of our circle, so they knew it was odd. I tell them about the morning and that I don't want to see him again. They go back out and tell the guys to leave after some fuss and yelling out for me again. They leave. The rest of the trip I was paranoid that they would come back, especially at night. And luckily, they didn't. This happened when my dad was 16, all the way back in 1976. Him and my uncle Nigel were very outgoing and liked to explore to keep themselves occupied. When the summer of 76 came around, my dad finished school. He wanted to do one big bit of adventuring before he began work. The Pennine Way. For those who do not know, the Pennine Way is a 270-mile walkway in Britain that, depending on which way you walk, starts in just south of Scotland and basically cuts through the middle of England and finishes in the Midlands. It usually takes around a 3 to 4 week walk. With a long summer to fill, my dad and 15-year-old Uncle Nigel and my dad's friend Russ were dropped off in Scotland by my great-grandfather to begin their hike. The first week went swimmingly. They met some nice locals who even cooked them food and gave them a room to sleep in, and generally enjoyed this whole new level of freedom entrusted upon them. They mainly camped in clear areas, but one day, they decided to cover an extra 5 miles in order to reach a village as they needed to buy some more food and get spare tents. They stumbled into a village around 6 p.m. and saw the local pub was opening. After relaxing in the pub with some drinks, my dad tells me that the owner probably knew they were in a rage, but wanted all the business they could get. The owner offered to let the guys camp out in the back field of their pub. The landlady's wife said the owner seemed oddly hesitant at first, looking a bit concerned and having a bit of a word with her husband in private. However, Yorkshire hospitality seemed to override any doubt she had after a night of heavy drinking with the locals. They recited to their tent. My dad says They were using an oil lantern hooked to a center of the tent as a light source, and when they turned it off, they left it hanging, which is important, not only for what happened next, but also what happened the next day. My dad woke up and turned off the oil light while debating to get up and having a piss in the field, assuming as the owners had been nice and letting them camp out there, when he heard a door creak open from the creek shut. There were no footsteps, so my dad had to put it down to an old shed or something. After a few seconds, however, the sound of feet landing on grass became progressively audible until they stopped right outside the tent. My dad thought it was the owner checking in on us, and he went to unzip the tent. The owner fully unzipped it. My dad said the weird thing about this was that he didn't have a shirt on, just some slippers and night trousers. After my dad asked what was doing, he stuttered out some excuse about hearing a growl and went to check if the boys were okay and safe. There was no growl, as the only sound in the last 5 minutes was the door, the footsteps, and the unzipping of the tent. The guy weirdly emphasized the need for a good sleep before hiking and intrusively tapped on the oil light, asking for it to be turned off. He walked off, letting off a frustrated sigh and nearing the house and closed the door behind him. Morning comes and the owner's wife makes the boys some breakfast while they pack up their stuff. The owner takes down the tent for them and takes off somewhere in his 4x4 without coming back to the house. They thank the woman and tell her husband thank you as well. She says that when she figures out when he comes back, that he will tell him. They come to their designated camping spot, just next to a small stream, around an hour and a half early, and decide to have a longer rest after walking around 130 to 140 miles over the past 8 to 9 days. They pour out the tent and find lots of small holes, all about a pent width and wide. What's weird about this is my dad described the size of it as holding a pen while telling me this. Everyone looks confused, and my dad rationalizes this by the man telling him about an animal last night. It must have come back and nibbled on the tent, as that explains it, sure. Russ suggests they walk back to a different village around 2 miles back and try to get another tent. They leave the now useless tent as a marker for their site and walk back to the village. Their luck, a shop clearly targeting walkers is open. Unfortunately, they didn't have any tents, but they decide to buy tape and cover the holes for tonight and hope to find a new tent somewhere soon. When walking back, the sun had begun to set and it was quite dark. Moonlight mainly guiding them back down the path. When they returned to their site, they couldn't believe it. Their tent was set up for them, but it was on fire, completely engulfed in flames. They threw the water in their bottles over the tent and used the stream water to fill them and eventually doused the fire. When they looked inside the tent, their oil lamp glass had been smashed, and someone had followed them, set up their tent, and waited for them to return before smashing the oil lamp and, in turn, lighting up the tent in flames. My dad told me that there really isn't an explanation except for the pub owner. He was stopping doing whatever he was planning on doing, but my dad, being awake, and decided to take some fucked up form of revenge by sending a message. At first, I totally didn't believe my dad and thought he was trying to scare me. But upon referencing the burning tent incident in a phone to my Uncle Nigel, he instantly started rambling about how weird it was. My Uncle Nigel does not lie. This happened about a year ago, on a camping trip to Kentucky in the winter. My girlfriend at the time and 3 of my buddies went to spend a long weekend doing some hiking and camping. We drove in on a Friday night at around midnight and set up camp. There was almost no one else at this campsite, besides a young couple a bit down the road from us and an older man down the road the other way. We unloaded the cars in the dark, got the headlamps out, and started setting up the tents. All of a sudden, my girlfriend noticed that she had an extra person among us. It was the young woman from the campsite a couple sites down. She looked really messed up. Her eyes were glazed and her skin looked like she had been picking at it constantly. She introduced herself and spoke in a sort of monotonous way. Overall, she seemed nice, but it's her boyfriend, or maybe husband, who really creeped us out. We noticed after talking with her for a bit that he was standing near a campsite at the edge of the woods just staring at us. Eventually, he went back to the campsite, but then got his car and pulled right up to us with his high beams on. As you can imagine, getting blasted by high beams at midnight in the middle of fucking nowhere really impairs your ability to see. His girlfriend said that she had to go and got in the car with him. At this point, we were all weirded out but not freaked out. It was later in the night when things got scary. I was in my tent with my girlfriend when I started to hear a domestic argument from the couple down the road. It soon escalated to full screaming. Then I heard the sound of glass break. At this point, my girlfriend and I are sitting up and deciding if we should do something. I hear someone getting into the car. The car then peels out of the campsite and races down the dirt road past our campsite, kicking up dirt and gravel against the side of our tent. The guy had apparently left his girlfriend in the campsite because we could hear her sobbing. My girlfriend and I start getting dressed so we can check out the situation. But the car comes peeling back up the road and parks back at the campsite. Loud, panicked shouting ensues and we hear two clops that sound exactly like gunshots. I remember the feeling of blood draining from my face. My girlfriend and I are basically frozen in our tent, listening. Finally, to our great relief, we hear them both start arguing again. The argument settles down by about 4 in the morning and we all fall asleep. When we woke up, they were gone. I asked my buddies if they heard what happened and they said it kept them up as well. We made breakfast and started packing up when the older man from the trailer walked over and started chatting with us. He seemed surprised that my girlfriend was with me. He said something along the lines of, "You shouldn't have brought her, it's not safe for women here." Needless to say, we were officially creeped out and we found a new area of the state park to stay. We found a lovely lakeside campsite the next night and enjoyed the rest of the trip, but we were certainly jarred by the encounters. A little background on the events I'm about to write about. This all happened in mid-October. My family owns about 160 acres of land in the middle of nowhere. Closest neighbor is a friend who let us rent the pasture for his cattle when he needs to. Some friends and I decided we wanted to build a little cabin out there and that we would hang out at it. So, one weekend, one of my friends and I loaded up a tractor we were renting from his dad and headed up out there. It was just me and him that weekend, as everyone else was busy. We got there a little late, since it took a while to get everything loaded and packed for the weekend. He sat about setting up the tent and I made our fire. As I did so, I made an odd discovery. There was a phone book from a few towns over, still in his plastic sleeve, right next to our fire pit. I picked it up and showed my friend. We both enjoyed scaring ourselves, and I made the comment that we aren't alone out here. We both laughed at it. Later that night, we were setting up around the campfire, talking and BSing. There was a big bright moon that night, and a bit of breeze which made the whatever leaves were left rustle. It was a little creepy, but we enjoyed the atmosphere. We noticed, however, someone crossing through the middle of the field. Their body just visible from the moonlight. At first, it was a little odd. My friend and I discussed for a few seconds if we should confront him, but I made the suggestion that he was probably just taking a shortcut across the field. Although I didn't really like it, it wasn't a huge deal. If we caught him doing it again, then we would confront him, we decided. The rest of the night passed pretty uneventfully. We eventually got in our tent and laid down. We were probably 20 or so feet in the fire pit, which was by that point burning quite low. We talked for a few minutes, and then we go silent, trying to fall asleep. As we're laying there, we hear something. It sounded like quiet footsteps walking around the fire pit. We both look at each other, silent. Then we hear a piece of wood getting thrown into the fire, and it flamed up quite a bit. I grabbed the shotgun I always kept in a tent and quickly racked it. We then heard someone run away, but by the time we got out, they were too far. The rest of the weekend was pretty quiet, and the events of the first night seemed kind of dreamy to us. We just cleared the area for the cabin and cut the stacked trees and cut them for the firewood. Next weekend, we get out there, but Uncle was out there as well. We went to check his game cams. This is where it got much more worrying for us. My uncle told us he was pissed because someone had stolen the batteries and SD cards out of the cameras. We told him about what happened the weekend before, and then parted ways. When we got out there, we noticed that quite a bit of our wood had been cut and stacked when it was already gone. And we were the last people to camp out there, which means someone had come out of there and took it ourselves. When we went and checked the tractor, which we had left down there, we found it broken into, and the chainsaw which we had left had been stolen. To make a long story short, nothing else so far has happened. I was hesitant for a few weeks to continue with the cabin, since we weren't there all the time. I was worried if it would be an incentive for whoever was there to stay. I'm not sure if it was transient or local or who. If, for some reason, anything else happened, I'll definitely update. I live in a very small town of about 100 people in rural New South Wales, Australia. This happened when my friends and I were 14. My town used to be a very close-knit farming community, but the shift to modern times and the massive drought of the 2000s led most of the businesses to be closed and farmers to move away. The aging population slowly died and their houses were filled with despicable types. Drug dealers and addicts, thieves and dole bludgers. It's sad, really. Even now, there are still great people here. What I've always found creepy is even though a very small population, and I've known just about everybody since before I can remember, there have always been people in the surrounding area that no one seems to know. Old loners mostly, who keep to themselves and no one ever sees them. On top of that, there have been several pedophile charges led against some of them, and there have been numerous break-ins and attempts to break-ins in our home. Not to mention that for the long stretches of time we've been out without police officers, which means a 000 call would take an hour for any help to arrive. It gets even creepier the further out the bush you go. I've heard of abandoned farmsteads where families have just disappeared, with all their belongings, including cars, left behind. There was even a multi-generational inbred family reminiscent of the Hills Have Eyes discovered a few years ago, though that's a few hundred miles from me. Anyway, I grew up and went to primary school here, but we had to travel an hour to go to high school. It took quite a while for my closest childhood friend, Tim, and I to make new friends. After 2 years of high school, we invited 3 of our friends to come out of town to come hiking and camping. Tim's parents owned a small property where they kept sheep, dogs, and horses a few miles from the town. We camped for 5 days there in the school holidays. The first night was what you would expect. We sat around the campfire telling stories. I told a story of some of those creepy loners I mentioned earlier, a pair of brothers that lived a few miles up the road that were camping. They were rarely seen, with the reputation of being very creepy hillbilly hicks. I told them the story of how one night they had tried to cripple my father over him supposedly stealing their business. They ambushed him at the local weighbridge at night. My father managed to fight both of them off. My cousin and I had also run into them taking a shortcut across their field, only to hear gunfire in his direction. My cousin has lied to me before, so I didn't really know if he was being honest. But I made it out like it was later embellished, that their reputation with the normal inbred cannibal type crap city folk expect. On the second night, we decided to go for a night walk. We were kids and enjoyed fantasy movies and games and had a bit of role-playing fun. One of us, though, was too scared to go into the dark, so on our walk we decided to play a prank on him. We started screaming and running back to the camp scattered, saying, "He got Henry." It worked and we caused our friend to get scared. Zeb, who our friend was, tried to climb an electric fence to escape. I had to come back dirty and bloody, and we hid from the farmhouse until Tim ruined a prank by claiming he heard the brothers skin people, which caused us to burst out laughing. The next afternoon, we hiked up the nearest hill, called Sims Gap Hill. It was a popular walk for Tim and I when we were kids. The fastest way to get to the hill was by taking the dirt road called the Stock Route, which ran parallel to the main tar road which led down to town. The 2 roads are connected by another called Sawmill Road, which was at the base of the hill. Anyway, We walked down the stock route, and I pointed out the Hillbilly Brothers property as we went past it. All you could see from the road are piles of rusted old cars. We reached Sawmill Road and walked across the paddock to the hill and had an enjoyable time. We started climbing down the hill as it got late, but underestimated the time it took to walk across the paddock to the road. By the time we reached the road, it was night, and of course it happened to be pitch black. As we started down Sawmill Road to the stock route, a pair of massive bright headlights turns into the road from behind us. Naturally, we got off the road, which meant disappearing into the thick patch of trees between the roads and the brothers' property. As the lights caught up to us, the vehicle started slowing. Up until then, we had thought it was a farmer's ute, but now we realized it was a very old, a very loud tractor. Not wanting to be questioned by any meddling adult, I encouraged the guys to hide. The tractor slowed right down and flashed a spotlight into the trees, and then sped away. The guys asked me who it was, and I said I didn't know. We continued walking slowly until we saw the tractor turn down the stock route and then into the brothers' property. Now, I was unnerved. The tractor came roaring down the fence line, and I yelled at my friends to run. We ran until we came into the small, well-hidden ditch, which we jumped in and laid very still. The tractor stopped right on us and shone the spotlight over the trees. It didn't illuminate the ditch. Luckily, the driver stopped the tractor and got off, walking over to the fence. I peered up and saw the silhouette of a dirty, disheveled man with messy hair standing at the fence line, looking around, with his rifle in his hand. In a nasally, Aussie hillbilly voice, he yelled out, "Where are you cunts?" We didn't dare move. I started thinking what we'd have to do if he climbed the fence and started coming our way. But he eventually turned around and got back on his tractor. I started with a groan and it rumbled down all the way. I got my friends up and we sprinted towards the stock route, ducking under branches and jumping over fallen trees. We hadn't quite reached it when the headlights were behind us again, roaring up Sawmill Road. We made it to the road and panicked. It was still 2 or 3 miles back to the camp, and we wouldn't be able to outrun the tractor. On the other side of the stock route was the state forest with tens of miles of twisting dirt roads and motorbike trails and coat tracks. Despite how dark it was with the strong possibility of getting lost, we dove in there. We hid as he went past us again, finding a forest road which led back to the general direction of the town. We followed it for a while, wondering if he had given up and if it was safe to go back on the stock route. Then he was in front of us, blinding headlights roaring down the forest road. We jumped back into the trees and started to run. We ran straight past him, behind us, and turned back onto the stock route and chased us again. He circled us 4 times, with us hiding then running, hiding then running. When we had gotten far enough that we thought we were close enough to camp, we ran through the woods and jumped back on the stock route, to be met by headlights. Tim's mother had come looking for us, finding our camp empty. She had finally found us and we were still a mile or so from the camp. We quickly piled in and she drove us back. We told her what happened, but she and my parents just said they're weird people and to stay away from them in the future. November last year, me and my friend decided to drive up a car to Scotland to do some fishing and eventually make our way to Edinburgh. After the first day of catching some salmon and brown trout, we stored our catchers in the cooler box. After contemplating whether to sleep in the car tonight, as we had left quite late to set up camp, at around 4:30ish and the sun was going down, eventually I said, let's set up a fire and cook the fish. I didn't drive all the way to Scotland to sleep in the car. My friend agreed as we set off looking for a spot to camp. We found a little wooded area next to a car park near a farm. We looked into it prior and apparently you can basically camp anywhere in Scotland as long as you left the place as you found it. So we grabbed all of our shit out of the car and started setting up our campsite. 20 minutes later we had a fire going, 2 fold-up chairs and 2 tents up. My tent was out of view from my friend. This will be relevant later. We were glad we chose to camp outside instead of sleeping in the car, as we smoked a few joints and we reminisced about school, life, and etc. My friend struggled to keep his eyes open as I checked my phone. 2 a.m. he called it, at night crawling into his tent and zipping it shut. I sat there with my feet up on my friend's now empty chair, listening to sounds of the wildlife. I shut off the torch and had hung up on the tree next to us, living in the darkness, apart from the burning embers from the coal. It must have been 3 or so minutes before I started to hear the crunching of leaves and snapping of twigs that seemed to be coming toward me. Being a quite rational person, I passed it off as a fox drawn to the scraps of food we might have laying around. I was quickly proven wrong when I heard a sniffle, like someone with a cold clearing their nose. My high quickly turned from chilled out to paranoia as I feel a heavy dread come over me. My mind raced. Why the fuck would someone be here in the woods at 2 to 3 a.m.? Why are they coming towards me? I slowly reached down the pocket and felt my heart drop as I didn't feel the smooth blade of my pocket knife. Shit, must have left it in a tent. All the while I hear the treading coming closer and closer and my heartbeat racing. Had the darkness to see a middle-aged man, clean-shaven, parted hair, around 5'10", slowly creeping toward me, almost in all fours like a predator, trying to stay out of sight. I sat there paralyzed, unable to speak. My mouth was so dry that I could hardly swallow. That's when I realized he hadn't even seen me. Being under the tree with no light source, I must have blended in. Also, with there only being one tent in view, I guess he thought my friend was the only one camping here. He got closer to the tent and half breathed and half whispered, "Come on, do it," in a raspy voice. Creeped the fuck out and unable to bear the thought of what he might do next. "Oi, can I help you?" He jumped up in shock and his whole demeanor changed. He looked at me mumbling awkward as he scurried back out of the woods. I sat there, still trying to comprehend what had just happened and what I saw. Then I saw headlights of a car turn on and drive away. I woke my friend up, and he could not tell what had happened, but he could see how shook up I was. Without full explanation from me, he willingly grabbed all our gear and we slept in the car that night with the doors locked. This story happened when I was about 7 years old. When I was younger, my family used to go to this lake in Arkansas called Norfork Lake. We could go down there every year in July to camp, boat, and swim. It is always a great time. Although, this time, my mom and dad decided to go camping for 3 weeks. I don't know if any of you go camping or not, but after the first week you are pretty much done. At this particular location, there was this pretty awesome playground area that my brother, sister, and I went to pretty much every day. It had the works: swing set, jungle gym, seesaw, hurricane spinners, spring riders, tetherball, you name it, the playground had it. And the best part about this area was that there was never any kids there, so naturally, this is where we spent most of our time. A few days in, we begin to notice that this white van with tinted windows is in the parking lot. At first, we didn't think anything of it, but every single day it would show up. Nothing would happen and nobody would get out, but nobody would get in either. It would just sit there. It was a pretty weird thing. I was young at this time, so I didn't really think too much or bother to even ask about it, but I could tell my brother and sister were freaked out by it. What really scared us is that we would see it drive by our camping area very slowly a couple times a day. So we decided to go to this other playground that was a little more out of the way just to avoid the white van. This seemed to work. We hadn't seen it for about a week and actually had forgotten about it. Until one day, we were all hanging out at the new park with this new friend we made. I was swinging on the swing set by myself. I was kind of a loner as a kid. While everybody else was out catching frogs or something at this nearby creek that was not within eyesight. I was just chilling by myself when, sure enough, here comes that white van. I am frozen. I try to scream out to my brother and sister, but they are too far away to hear. The guy gets out of the van. All I remember is that he was smoking a cigarette, had a dirty yellow shirt on. He is walking straight towards me. He lifts up his hand and motioned to me to come to him. Right when he gets about 30 feet from me, my parents pull up with our truck and call out my name. The guy immediately changes his direction and walks towards the woods. I had never been so happy to see my parents in my life. We grab my brother and sister and I tell my parents the whole story about the guy in the white van. We get back to the camp, start packing right away. We have not been back to Norfolk Lake since. What really scares me is that he would drive past our campsite every day, and he knew exactly where we were sleeping. So let me start off with a little bit of background info. I'm a 14-year-old Canadian male, and this happened around a year ago. This story is nothing but the truth. Me and my grandparents are extremely close and have been all my life. So my grandfather is an outdoorsy, get off your phone kind of guy, and he pitched the idea to go camping in early August. I was kind of excited because I don't get outside as often as I should, and I figured it would be some quality time with him. That being said, we weren't going true camping. He wanted to go into the woods, so I told him about a nearby campground that we could go to instead. He was still thrilled, so we embarked on our weekend journey. Let me paint you a picture. Our campsite was a dead end, aside from the one next to ours. It was right near the lake. It was beautiful, but to our dismay, we had people right next to us. We did all the camping things, made a fire, swimming, and even the infamous, spooky stories around the campfire. We hit the sack at around 10 p.m. because there was not much else to do. As soon as my head hit the pillow, it started. The crunching of leaves on our campsite. We thought nothing of it at the time because the night was still young. Some assholes were setting off fireworks and others were having a raging party. Hell, even our neighbors were still laughing. I fell asleep for a while. 11 p.m. is when it started to get weird. The party was still on, but our neighbors shut up, so the crunching of leaves didn't make sense. It was consistent, so my guess is that the noise was footsteps. No one needed to be on our campsite, so falling asleep was a slightly bigger challenge. My grandpa seemed to be having an even harder time as he seemed to be on alert mode. Yes, I know we are both paranoid, but I feel like the paranoia keeps us safe. I wake up and check my watch and it's 12 a.m. It's starting to rain and the water is splashing against the rocks and the thunder in the distance is quiet enough to sleep to. Even over the sound of rain pattering as the tarp, I still hear the fucking footsteps. The unsettling nature of the situation starts to eat away at me. I wasn't scared, just creeped out. Sleep overcame me, but it didn't come easy. My grandfather finally slept too. A crack of thunder woke me up. Full-blown thunderstorm now. I felt relieved if I thought the footsteps stopped. But I heard the thump of wood. I don't know what the person did, but I heard 2 very loud knocks, followed by 2 large splashes. Fuck this, was my only thought as the footsteps continued around our campsite. I stayed awake until, like 5 a.m. Daybreak was near, but my heart nearly exploded when I heard someone fumbling with our tent zipper in the fabric. I see the outline of 3 fingers being dragged across the tent. My body shut down as my blood just seemed to chill. The hand trailed away and became quieter as they left our campsite. I woke my grandfather up as soon as the sun came up. Before we left, I went to investigate our site. Lots of the ground was turned into mud in the storm, so the mass of the boot prints were very unnoticeable. But you could see many footsteps. Easy to say we dipped the fuck out after that, and that was it. We were teenagers. We were in love. This was in the late 90s before cell phones and prepaid AOL internet. Our parents were protective of us. He was captain of the football team and I was cheer captain. We were heavily regulated by parents and coaches, but still had our bad streak. We knew what we wanted to get down. We got the great idea that we would steal some alone time if we hid a tent during the day in a city forest. We decided we would hide a tent, set it up, and return after the game in the dark. We set up the pop-up tent, 2 sleeping bags, 2 fleece blankets, 2 pillows, 3 extra tent spikes, a mag light, condoms, and 2 bottles of water. All set. After the game, we told our parents that we were going for ice cream for a few hours. We drove down to a rural public launch site where we could walk 20 minutes into the woods to our little camp. We got there, started making out, and the dark end turned into crazy heart-pounding awesomeness. I stopped. I told him to stop. I heard footsteps outside our tent. I prayed it was a deer, but then it was clearly bipedal, and I prayed for a bear. Then I heard the man breathing. I smelled a cigarette. Neither of us smoked. We put our clothes on. I picked up a tent stake and shoved it in my boyfriend's hand, and he stood up and saw his wallet in the corner of the tent and shoved it to his pocket. I picked up one of each of the remaining 10 stakes in my hand. The footsteps stopped. I unzipped the tent quickly. My boyfriend pushed me out in front of him. What a gentleman. And I have another story following that. We ran through the woods, not looking back. We got into his car and tore out, both of us sobbing. He pulled over, pulling into my driveway so I could puke. A boyfriend went home, and we decided the next morning that he would go back to the site to get our expensive tent and blankets that we had left around midnight before. He had to work at 5:30 a.m. When he returned, there was nothing there. No blankets, no pillows, no tent. We made no police report. I mean, what could we say? We were horny teenagers making horror movie decisions. My mom still asked about the pink and white fleece blanket I lost that night. I never have an answer. To whoever who was smoking a cigarette in the woods, listening to 2 teens having fun, and then scaring them and stealing their tent, that's probably the shittiest thing that's ever happened to anybody.